The Australian Financial Review.
A few weeks ago, technology columnist John Davidson was out for breakfast.
I was visiting my family in Canberra and I was sitting in a cafe with my sisters, and there was a long line of people waiting to order at the front counter. So we decided we'd use the internet app, and I went through and I took everyone's orders, and I was just about to get to the payment, and the app insisted that I give it my phone number and my email address. And I thought, well, you don't need this data. I'm just sitting right here.
So what did you do?
I contacted the app owner and I told them that I thought it might be illegal, and then I started writing a story about this. And it got me wondering about the amount of personal information some businesses are collecting and how it's being stored. And then a week later, the Medibank data breach happened.
I know Australians are angry, distressed and seeking answers about the highly sensitive and deeply personal information that is being released by criminals who breached Medibank Private's database.
I actually feel like my privacy has been violated. My family is all, we all use Medibank Private. All of that information is out there. You know, it's my date of birth, my sex, my addresses, all of that stuff, it's out there forever.
Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. Today, we talk to the Australian Financial Review's John Davidson about the Medibank hack, how it happened, and why Russian criminals may not be our biggest problem. It's Thursday, November 17. John, it's been a dramatic month for Medibank and its customers. Talk us through what happened.
Well, Lisa, it all began to unfold on October 12 when Medibank, as well as the Defence Signals Directorate in Canberra, noticed that there was unusual activity on the Medibank network. The very first thing they noticed was what appeared to be a ransomware attack. And that's an attack that many Australians would be familiar with. That's where hackers get into your network and then they encrypt all your data and then ask for a ransom in exchange for a key to decrypt the data. But what they didn't realise at the time was that as a precursor to the ransomware attack, the Russian gang had already downloaded around 200 gigabytes worth of data. Their intention was to encrypt the Medibank network, to completely seize up their system so that Medibank would have been forced to pay in the next day or so to get a decryption key so that they could just get the usage of their computer system back. But that attack was thwarted, and then it appears from reading all the emails that were sent to and fro between the hackers and Medibank that the hackers fell back on what you might call their plan B, which was to use the data that they'd already exfiltrated while they were scoping out the ransomware attack, their plan A, and then demand that Medibank pay a ransom to stop that data, the data of 9.7 million Australians, being exposed on the internet.
Another cyber attack is threatening the online safety of Australians this morning, with hackers now targeting the personal information of Medibank customers.
Medibank Private says a criminal group claims to have stolen 200 gigabytes of personal customer data.
We expect the number of affected customers to grow and the scale of the impact to increase as this unfolds.
The threat that is being made here to make the private personal health information of Australians made available to the public is a dog act.
Initially, they sent the information to Medibank to give them the opportunity to check that it was the information that was stolen in the hack and to provide sort of the bona fides of the hacker group itself. And they sent what was called a naughty list to Medibank, which was the list of customers who had diagnoses that the cyber criminals thought might be embarrassing to those customers if that data came out. And then there was to and fro between Medibank and the cyber criminals talking about whether they would pay a ransom or not. And in the end, Medibank said,
Many people may think that paying extortion would guarantee the return of the data of our customers to us. You just can't trust a criminal. This is a decision that's consistent with the government policy on ransomware, and this is why we've made the decision to not pay this ransom.
So within the next few days, the cyber criminals released the data onto the internet.
So, John, those data leaks started last Wednesday, and it's really unsettled Australians. I think we are used to cyber attacks. We're used to phishing for information through text messages or emails. But Medibank was on a bigger scale, and it also came on the heels of the Optus attack. Were those two attacks similar?
There's no doubt that the Medibank attack was a sophisticated attack. It actually started a lot earlier when a worker for Medibank, either an employee or a subcontractor, had their credentials stolen, and then those credentials were sold over the dark web to this sophisticated criminal gang, which turns out to have been in Russia, who then embarked on a lengthy period of mapping out the network and exfiltrating data. That's very different from what appears to have happened with the Optus attack. There's a thing in computing known as an application programming interface, and that's where the data in your database gets transformed into sort of a form that can be read by web browsers, say, or by phone apps. What people think happened was that this API was accidentally left on the internet when it shouldn't have been, and there was no security around it because it was never intended to be on the internet. And then someone walked straight in and downloaded the data. So for Optus to say it was a sophisticated attack, if it indeed was just an open API, that's like a bank saying it had left its money in garbage bags out the back in a skip, and someone had jumped the fence and grabbed the garbage bags and they were robbed.
So Optus still hasn't come out and told us exactly how it happened, but is it fair to say that in both cases it looks like human error was involved?
The thing is, there's always going to be human error. What we need are systems that are robust against human error. And part of the way of getting towards such a system is to stop collecting data. Australian culture over the last few years has slowly drifted towards more and more data collection, and companies are encouraged to collect as much data as they can in case they find patterns in the data that they can then commercialise in some way. And we're seeing that with real estate agents. We're seeing that everywhere. Even if I walk into a cafe, I see it.
So how do businesses and companies store this information, and what do they do with it?
A lot of this information is being stored inside of databases, and there are vast tools that have arisen over the last 20 years called data mining tools, where you can go through and look for patterns in the data, where you can hope to find something like that people who buy nappies also buy beer, and so you put the nappies next to the beer. That's the classic example of data mining. They're looking for these ways just to slightly increase their revenues. A lot of the data they don't need for the actual day-to-day operation of their business, but they tell themselves that they need it in order to remain competitive in the future. We store this information, we can find out things about our customers, we can market to them a bit better than we were before. But the problem is they're not always storing it securely. I've been speaking to the former New South Wales Deputy Privacy Commissioner about this, Anna Johnston, and she agrees.
I think what both Medibank and Optus and other recent data breaches have shown us is that instead of data being the new gold or the new oil, it's become kind of toxic for organisations to hold too much of it or to keep it for too long.
And what's the record like for Australian companies in storing and protecting data?
I've asked Alistair McGibbon this exact question. He's the former head of the Australian Cyber Security Centre. And he said that Australia for a long time has underinvested in certain types of the security that you need to put around data if you don't want to get hacked. There's kind of three levels of security that you need to do. There's the immediate walls that you put up, the firewalls and the VPNs and the multi-factor authentication around passwords. There's those things that you put up, and that's something that Australian companies have focused on a little, although most people would say that they've underinvested in that too. But that's only the first of 3 steps you've got to do. The other 2 steps involve constant monitoring of your network, just to check that no one has breached the walls or that no one is trying the doors in the walls with a view to breaching them. Now, the reason we need to constantly measure our cyber defences is that there's always going to be human error. I've spoken to one expert who said that even 99.9% of the breaches she had investigated involved human error. And then the third step is having some sort of rapid response team available, either in-house or hired through some sort of third party, that the moment the monitoring has showed that there's an attack underway can respond quickly. So Alistair McGibbon told me that it's those second 2, it's the monitoring and the funding of the rapid reaction team that Australian companies are predominantly under-investing in. And it's estimated that within the next few years there's going to be a shortage of around 30,000 cybersecurity specialists just in Australia. So, Lisa, we're increasingly finding ourselves in the perfect storm that has led us to where we are today. We've got the shortage of cybersecurity experts, which is only going to get worse over the next few years. We've got Australian companies collecting too much data and maybe not securing it well enough. And if all of this wasn't enough, we've had another factor added this year: Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
The AFP is undertaking covert measures and working around the clock with our domestic agencies and our international networks, including Interpol. This is important because we believe those responsible for the breach are in Russia. Cybercrime is the break and enter of the 21st century, and personal information is being used as currency. I thank you for your time today.
John, we've been talking about the increasing number and intensity of these attacks. Why would a war thousands of kilometres away have any impact on the cybersecurity threat in Australia?
Many of the cybersecurity threats that Australia and other nations have been facing have been coming out of Russia already for years. There's for a long time been a tacit understanding between the Russian government and the cybersecurity gangs working out of Russia that as long as they didn't try to break into the networks of Russian companies and blackmail Russians, then they were free to do as they chose. But since the war in Ukraine and the economic blockade that came about as a result of the war in Ukraine, experts are saying now they've detected a shift in that balance of power, that the Russian government is now working more closely with the cyber gangs. And there's a few reasons posited for this. Part of it could be simply that the cyber gangs are themselves quite patriotic and they want to punish countries like Australia that have been involved in the blockade. That might be one of the motivations. Another of the motivations might be that they're actually chipping into the war effort, that when you pay a ransom for a ransomware attack or for a extortion over the leaking of data, some of that money maybe goes to fund the war in Ukraine. So not only have the stakes for any one cyber attack been raised, but we're possibly even seeing the frequency of attacks increasing to the point where, according to Australia's top cybersecurity agency, we're now getting a report of one cyber attack every 7 minutes.
So is the Medibank attack typical of the type of cybercrime we're seeing on the rise?
Yeah, that's right, Lisa. It was both a ransomware attack or an availability attack, and it was what's known as a confidentiality attack. Cyber experts are most terrified about a third type of attack, though. That's known as an integrity attack, where someone gets onto your computer system and subtly changes data in a way that is either hard to fix or it's hard to detect. And it's when all three types of attacks get blended together that things start to get really scary. A company could find itself in a situation where it's had its data encrypted and its data exfiltrated, and it pays some sort of ransom, or it finally gets to the bottom of that, only to find that the data has been changed when it recovers it. And experts I've spoken to say that that's a big threat for financial services in particular, where the risk is that state actors could get in and change the data, say in a big bank, and potentially throw the entire economic system into chaos.
So you've got that nightmare scenario. You've got the idea that the Medibank attack could have potentially been helping Russia's war effort against Ukraine. It's probably not surprising that the Australian government has come out really strongly against these attacks.
I thank the member for Patterson. I cannot articulate the disgust I have for the scumbags who are at the heart of this criminal act.
And Minister for Cybersecurity Claire O'Neil said the government's considering making ransom payments illegal.
There's some really big policy questions that we are going to need to think about and consult on, and we're going to do that in the context of the cyber strategy.
So you'll have a look at that?
Yeah, so we'll have a look at that.
At whether to make it illegal?
That's correct.
OK, let's move to some...
That sort of implies that companies have been actually paying ransoms up until this attack. Do you think that that's the case? And would making it illegal solve the problem?
It's certainly the case that Australian businesses and businesses all over the world have been paying for ransomware attacks. They're in a moment of crisis. Their system is down. They can't do transactions. Their staff can't log in. The easiest thing to do, and the thing that is done very often, is to pay the hackers to unlock the network. The problem is, now that it's been politicised, now that there's a possibility that you'd be contributing to a war effort if you paid the ransom, now that it might be illegal to pay ransoms, companies are between a rock and a hard place. So it looks like the only solution is to build robust security around your data. Minimise your data. Practice data hygiene, where you've protected the stuff you need to keep and you've thrown out the stuff that you don't need. Set up monitoring so that you know when your network or your computer system is under attack and respond quickly.
So put all your resources into trying not to get hacked in the first place. So do you think on that point that the past dramatic few weeks with Optus and Medibank has heightened or lessened the risk for Australians? What I'm trying to say is, will the Medibank and Optus hacks frighten corporations and the government into doing more about this?
Privacy experts for a long time have been complaining that boardrooms in Australia aren't really aware of the problem. The fines in Australia have been too small. In fact, there's never ever been a fine in Australia. But if there were, it would be tiny. It's $2.2 million compared to hundreds of millions of dollars worth of fines that you could get if you had a data breach in Europe, say.
I'll give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The bill will increase penalties for a serious or repeated breach of privacy from $2.22 million to not more than the greater of $50 million, 3 times the value of any benefit obtained through the misuse of the information.
So it could be a huge fine, which will make Australian boards alive to the threat if Medibank and Optus has not already woken them up.
The bill is an important and pressing reform that will make sure penalties for privacy breaches adequately reflect community expectations and will ensure Australia...
But at the same time, we're not going to be able to stop hacks. That's a simple fact. Since we've had the rise of cryptocurrency, which has made it easy for hackers to get a payout for their nefarious deeds, since information has gone on the internet, we're going to have hacks. Alistair McGibbon said to me, there will be blood. The only question is how much blood.
So if we can't stop the hacks, what can be done to limit the damage?
Lisa, we need to take control of the things that we can actually control. companies can't create IT systems that are impervious to attack because there's always going to be human error opening up security holes in networks. And we can't force Putin to stop harbouring cyber criminals. We can't put an end to the war in Europe and to the economic blockade of Russia. But there are things we can do. We need to start practicing better data hygiene. As Anna Johnston tells anyone who will listen, companies can stop asking for data that they might want but they don't actually need for the operation of their business. And we as consumers can push back against that culture of data hoovering.
The best way to prevent a cybersecurity attack is to not hold data in the first place. And that's really the kind of the revolution that we need to see in terms of business practices and government practices, is to stop collecting so much data in the first place and be much more judicious in what you ask for, like what you collect, how long you keep it for, what you use it for, and the kind of data security you wrap around it.
If there's going to be a silver lining out of all of this, if the Optus data leak and the Medibank cyber attack are going to produce a positive result for Australia, it's that they've awoken Australian boardrooms to the threat of cyber attack. And also they've given political coverage to Mark Dreyfus, to the Attorney General's Department, to the Australian Law Reform Commission, who want to change Australia's Privacy Act to make the penalties a lot higher so that next time we see an attack, next time there is blood flowing from Australia's corporate networks, it's just a scratch.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Lisa.
Here's the other big stories we're covering this week. Medibank Chairman Mike Wilkins defended the insurer at its annual general meeting on Wednesday, insisting it had been transparent in communications with customers affected by the recent cyber attack. And Donald Trump has confirmed his intention to run for the White House again in 2024, despite concerns that his influence over the Republican Party was to blame for a weaker than expected result in the midterm elections. Thank you for listening to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray with John Davidson reporting today. The Fin is produced by Alex Gow and Lap Fan. Fiona Buffini is the executive producer. Our theme is by Alex Gow. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and consider rating and reviewing us as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to The Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.